In the heart of a bustling city, where tall buildings cast long shadows across busy streets, an extraordinary story of justice, compassion, and human dignity was about to unfold. It began on a crisp autumn morning when a young boy named Anthony walked into his elementary school, carrying not just his backpack but the weight of unfair treatment on his small shoulders. Anthony was a bright-eyed 8-year-old with a passion for science and mathematics. His teachers often remarked on his exceptional problem-solving abilities and his kind nature toward his classmates. However, recent events at school had begun to dim the light in his eyes. The incident that would eventually lead him to the courthouse started with a simple misunderstanding in the school cafeteria. During lunch period, another student had accidentally spilled their milk, creating a mess on the floor. Anthony, being nearby, was immediately blamed by a staff member who hadn't witnessed the incident. Despite several classmates trying to explain what really happened, the staff member made Anthony stay behind to clean up the mess and miss his favorite class, science. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the past few months, Anthony had been repeatedly singled out for disciplinary actions for things he hadn't done. His parents, hardworking professionals who had always taught their son to stand up for what's right, noticed the change in their usually cheerful boy. They saw how he began to withdraw, how his enthusiasm for school started to fade, and how he would sometimes cry silently in his room, thinking no one could hear. Anthony's mother, a dedicated nurse who worked night shifts at the local hospital, and his father, who ran a small community bookstore, decided enough was enough. They had attempted to address these issues with the school administration multiple times, but their concerns were consistently dismissed or minimized. The final straw came when Anthony was wrongfully suspended for 3 days over an incident in the playground that camera footage later proved he wasn't even present for. The family sought legal help, and their case landed on the desk of Judge Richard Thompson, a veteran of the justice system known for his careful consideration of cases involving children. What made this case particularly significant was not just the circumstances, but the broader implications it would have for the school system and how it handled disciplinary actions. As the case began to unfold, it became clear that Anthony's situation wasn't unique. Other families began to come forward with similar stories, revealing a pattern that needed to be addressed. The courthouse, usually a place of stern faces and formal proceedings, was about to become the stage for a remarkable demonstration of justice and human understanding. The morning of the hearing, Anthony sat in the courthouse with his parents, his small hands clutching a notebook where he had written down everything that had happened to him, in his own words. His father had taught him that writing things down helps to organize your thoughts, and Anthony had taken this advice to heart. The notebook contained not just accounts of the incidents, but also his feelings, his confusion, and his hopes for change. Judge Thompson, known for his unique approach to cases involving children, did something unexpected that day. Instead of proceeding with the usual formal court procedures, he decided to have a conversation with Anthony first. He came down from his bench, removed his judicial robe, and sat next to the young boy. This simple act of humanity would set the tone for what was about to become a landmark case in the district's history. The judge noticed the notebook in Anthony's hands and asked him about it. With encouragement from his parents, Anthony began to share his story, page by page. His voice, though soft at first, grew stronger as he spoke. The courthouse fell silent as everyone present, from the court reporter to the school administrators, listened to the clear, honest voice of an 8-year-old describing his experiences. As the morning progressed, it became evident that this case was about more than just one boy or one school. It was about the fundamental right of every child to be treated fairly and with dignity. Judge Thompson listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking Anthony questions that showed he was truly trying to understand the situation from the child's perspective. The power of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present in the courthouse that day. Here was a judge, setting aside formal procedures to ensure that a child's voice was truly heard. It was a reminder that behind every case number and legal document, there were real people with real stories that deserved to be told and understood. As Anthony's testimony continued into the afternoon, more details emerged that painted a troubling picture of systemic issues within the school. The young boy spoke about how he would often sit alone during lunch breaks, not because he wanted to, but because other students had been discouraged from playing with him. He described incidents where he was blamed for disruptions in class even when he was quietly reading or working on his assignments. His mother, fighting back tears, shared how she had found Anthony's science project, a carefully constructed model of the solar system, in the trash one day. When questioned, a teacher had dismissed it as probably being in the wrong place. The project had won first place in last year's science fair, and Anthony had kept it proudly displayed in his classroom until that day. Judge Thompson listened with growing concern as evidence was presented showing a pattern of discriminatory practices. School records revealed that certain students, particularly children of color, received disproportionately harsh punishments for minor infractions, while similar behavior from other students was often overlooked or handled with simple verbal warnings. The courthouse atmosphere grew tense as the school administrators attempted to defend their actions. They cited policies and procedures, speaking in bureaucratic terms about maintaining order and standard disciplinary protocols. But their arguments felt hollow against the simple truth of Anthony's experiences and the supporting evidence presented by other families who had come forward. What happened next would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. Judge Thompson, still sitting at eye level with Anthony, asked him a question that would change the course of the proceedings: "What do you think would make school fair for everyone?" The simplicity and directness of the question caught everyone off guard. Anthony thought for a moment, then opened his notebook to a fresh page. With the wisdom that sometimes only children possess, he began to share his ideas. He spoke about wanting teachers who would listen before making judgments, about having the chance to explain himself when things went wrong, and about his dream of a school where every student felt safe and welcomed. The judge took particular interest in a drawing Anthony had made in his notebook, a simple sketch of his classroom where every desk was arranged in a circle, so everyone could see each other's faces when they talked. This small detail spoke volumes about the child's inherent understanding of fairness and community. As the afternoon wore on, more parents came forward with their stories. A pattern emerged of subtle but persistent discrimination that had gone unchecked for too long. The evidence wasn't just in documented incidents, but in the emotional toll it had taken on children like Anthony, bright, capable students whose spirits were being dampened by unfair treatment. Judge Thompson began to take extensive notes, occasionally asking Anthony to clarify certain points or elaborate on his experiences. The judge's approach was methodical but compassionate, gathering not just facts but understanding the emotional impact of these incidents on the children involved. The school district's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats as more evidence was presented. Security camera footage from various incidents contradicted the official reports filed by school staff. Written complaints from parents spanning several years showed that concerns about discriminatory treatment had been consistently downplayed or ignored. But what truly captured everyone's attention was when Anthony's father shared a series of videos he had recorded of his son before and after the incidents began. The contrast was stark, from a cheerful, outgoing child eagerly sharing his latest science experiments, to a subdued boy who had started to doubt his own worth. The courtroom fell silent as these videos played. Even the most hardened legal professionals present couldn't help but be moved by the visible change in the young boy. Judge Thompson watched intently, occasionally glancing at Anthony, who sat bravely beside his parents, his notebook clutched tightly to his chest. As the second day of proceedings drew to a close, it was clear to everyone present that this case had evolved into something much larger than a simple disciplinary dispute. It had become a moment of reckoning for the entire school system, a chance to address deep-seated issues that had been ignored for far too long. Judge Thompson concluded the day's proceedings with an unusual request. He asked Anthony to write down what a perfect school day would look like to him. This simple assignment would prove to be a crucial element in the judge's eventual decision, though no one knew it at the time. The next morning, Anthony arrived at the courthouse clutching several pages of carefully written notes. His mother had stayed up with him late into the night, watching as he poured his heart into describing his vision of what school could be. The courthouse was more crowded than previous days, as word had spread about the unique case and Judge Thompson's unconventional approach. Anthony's description of his perfect school day was both heartbreaking and inspiring in its simplicity. He wrote about wanting to raise his hand in class without fear of being ignored. He described a lunch period where he could sit with anyone he chose, and playground time where games were organized fairly. Most touchingly, he wrote about wanting to show his younger sister, who would start school next year, that education could be a joy rather than something to fear. The school administrators, who had initially approached the case with defensive bureaucratic responses, began to show visible signs of discomfort as Anthony read his words aloud. His pure, unfiltered perspective cut through the complex legal arguments and policy justifications, laying bare the fundamental issues at hand. During the mid-morning break, an unexpected development occurred. One of the school's veteran teachers, Mrs. Chen, asked to speak. With trembling hands but a steady voice, she described how she had witnessed similar incidents over her 20-year career but had felt powerless to address them. She spoke about the subtle ways in which certain students were treated differently, and how attempts to raise these concerns were often met with bureaucratic silence or professional consequences. The testimony of Mrs. Chen opened the floodgates. Other teachers began to come forward, each sharing their own observations and experiences. A school counselor revealed how she had been instructed to handle disciplinary issues differently based on students' backgrounds. A cafeteria worker described witnessing incidents similar to the one Anthony had been blamed for, but feeling afraid to speak up for fear of losing her job. Judge Thompson listened intently to each testimony, occasionally glancing at Anthony, who sat drawing in his notebook. The young boy was sketching what looked like a classroom, but this time with smiling faces on every student he drew. The judge noticed how Anthony would look up whenever someone new spoke, his eyes full of hope and curiosity rather than the fear that had been present on the first day. As the day progressed, expert witnesses took the stand to present statistics and studies showing patterns of systemic bias in school disciplinary actions across the district. However, it was the human stories that seemed to have the most impact. A child psychologist testified about the long-term effects of unfair treatment on young minds, explaining how early experiences of injustice can shape a person's entire worldview. During the afternoon session, Anthony's father shared something unexpected. He had been documenting not just the incidents involving his son, but also the positive moments, times when teachers had shown fairness and understanding, when other parents had spoken up in support, and when students had stood by Anthony despite pressure to exclude him. This testimony showed that change was possible, that there were already people within the system working to make things better. The atmosphere in the courthouse shifted as these stories of hope emerged alongside the evidence of injustice. Judge Thompson began asking more forward-looking questions, focusing not just on what had gone wrong, but on how things could be made right. He paid particular attention to suggestions that came from the children themselves, including Anthony's carefully thought-out ideas. A powerful moment came when one of Anthony's classmates, a quiet girl who had been watching the proceedings with her parents, asked if she could speak. With the judge's permission, she described how she and other students had felt helpless watching their friend being treated unfairly. She spoke about how they had tried to tell the truth about incidents but weren't believed, and how this had affected their own sense of right and wrong. As the day drew to a close, Judge Thompson did something unprecedented. He asked Anthony to join him in his chambers, along with his parents and the court-appointed child advocate. The judge wanted to hear directly from Anthony about what justice would look like in his eyes. This private conversation would later be revealed as the turning point in the case, though its contents remained confidential. What emerged from that meeting was visible in Anthony's face as he left the judge's chambers. For the first time since the proceedings began, he was smiling, not the nervous smile of a child in an overwhelming situation, but the genuine smile of someone who felt truly heard and understood. The fourth day of proceedings brought an unexpected turn of events. As word of the case spread throughout the community, former students from the same school district began arriving at the courthouse. They ranged in age from recent high school graduates to adults in their 30s, each carrying their own stories of similar experiences from years past. Judge Thompson, recognizing the historical significance of these testimonies, made the unusual decision to hear them. One particularly moving testimony came from a successful local business owner who had attended the same elementary school 20 years ago. He described how similar experiences had nearly derailed his education entirely, and how it took years to rebuild his self-confidence. As he spoke, Anthony listened intently, occasionally writing in his notebook. Later, when asked what he had written, Anthony showed a page where he had carefully noted, "Bad things don't have to last forever." The school district's legal team, watching as testimony after testimony painted a picture of long-standing systemic issues, began to shift their approach. Instead of defending past actions, they started asking questions about how to implement meaningful changes. This shift didn't go unnoticed by Judge Thompson, who had been carefully observing the evolving dynamics in his courtroom. During the afternoon session, an educational reform expert presented research on successful programs from other districts that had faced and addressed similar challenges. The presentation included video interviews with administrators and teachers from these districts, sharing their experiences of how positive change had transformed their schools. Anthony, who had been quiet for most of the morning, suddenly raised his hand. Judge Thompson, maintaining his child-centered approach to the proceedings, acknowledged Anthony's request to speak. The young boy stood up, still clutching his ever-present notebook, and asked a question that silenced the courtroom. "If other schools fixed this, why did we have to wait for a judge to help us?" The simplicity and directness of his question cut through all the legal complexity and expert testimony. Several school board members, present in the courtroom that day, visibly reacted to the innocent yet powerful inquiry. One of them, a newly elected member who had campaigned on promises of educational reform, requested permission to address the court. She spoke about the challenges of changing established systems but acknowledged that difficulty was no excuse for inaction. She then did something unprecedented. She apologized directly to Anthony and all the other students who had suffered similar experiences. The sincerity of her words was evident, as was her commitment to making real changes. What happened next transformed the atmosphere of the proceedings entirely. The school superintendent, who had been notably quiet throughout the previous days, stood up and asked to speak. With visible emotion, he shared his own journey of realizing how policies he had helped implement, though well-intentioned, had contributed to the problems they were now confronting. He then turned to Anthony and his family, offering not just an apology but a commitment to work with them and other families to reshape the school's approach to discipline and student support. This unexpected moment of vulnerability from a top administrator sparked a chain reaction throughout the courtroom. Other school officials began to speak up, sharing their own reflections and acknowledging their roles in perpetuating unfair practices. The conversation shifted from defending past actions to actively planning for change. Judge Thompson, recognizing this crucial shift, encouraged this dialogue while ensuring it remained focused on concrete actions rather than just good intentions. Anthony's parents, who had been stoic throughout much of the proceedings, finally allowed themselves to show emotion. His mother spoke about her hopes for not just her son, but for all children in the district. She shared her vision of a school system where every child could thrive without fear of unfair treatment. The afternoon session took an unexpected turn when Anthony asked if he could share something from his notebook. With encouragement from Judge Thompson, he read aloud a list he had been compiling throughout the proceedings. It was titled "Things That Would Make School Better for Everyone," and included practical suggestions like having student representatives in disciplinary meetings, creating an anonymous reporting system for unfair treatment, and establishing regular check-ins between teachers and students. The simplicity and practicality of Anthony's suggestions impressed everyone present. These weren't complex policy proposals or expensive programs, they were straightforward ideas that could make an immediate difference in students' lives. Judge Thompson paid particular attention, taking notes and occasionally asking Anthony to elaborate on specific points. As the day drew to a close, there was a palpable sense that the case had evolved beyond its original scope. What had started as one family's stand against injustice had become a catalyst for systemic change. Judge Thompson announced that he would need time to consider all the evidence and testimonies before making his final ruling, but his commitment to ensuring justice for Anthony and all students was clear. Before adjourning for the day, the judge did something remarkable. He asked Anthony to come forward one more time, not to testify or answer questions, but to share what he had learned from the experience. Anthony's response was both simple and profound. I learned that sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared, and that telling the truth can help make things better for everyone. The fifth day of proceedings began with an atmosphere of anticipation. The courthouse was filled to capacity, with community members, educators, and families all waiting to hear Judge Thompson's approach to resolving this complex case. However, before announcing any decisions, the judge had arranged for something unprecedented, a community dialogue session within the courthouse. The session began with small group discussions, where parents, teachers, administrators, and students sat together in circles, sharing their perspectives and experiences. Anthony and his family were placed in a group with several school board members, 2 teachers who had testified earlier, and families who had shared similar experiences. The judge moved from group to group, listening intently to the conversations unfolding. What emerged from these discussions was remarkable. Teachers spoke openly about the pressures they faced and the support they needed to create more equitable classrooms. Administrators shared the challenges of balancing policy requirements with individual student needs. Parents offered insights into how school experiences affected their children's home life and overall well-being. Most importantly, students like Anthony felt empowered to share their ideas for change. They spoke about wanting to create a student council that would have a real voice in school policies, especially regarding discipline. They suggested peer mediation programs and student-led initiatives to promote understanding and fairness. During a break in the discussions, Anthony approached Judge Thompson with his notebook open to a new page. He had drawn a picture of what he called a fairness circle, a simple but powerful concept where students and teachers would meet regularly to talk about their concerns and celebrations. The judge studied the drawing carefully, asking Anthony thoughtful questions about how such a system might work. The afternoon session brought another surprise. Several local community organizations had come forward with offers of support for implementing changes in the school system. A youth advocacy group proposed partnering with the school to provide training for teachers and staff about unconscious bias and cultural competency. A local technology company offered to develop an anonymous reporting system for students to safely report unfair treatment. What made these offers particularly meaningful was that they weren't just about throwing money at the problem, they were about creating sustainable, community-supported solutions. Judge Thompson listened carefully as representatives from these organizations presented their ideas, occasionally glancing at Anthony to gauge his reactions. One of the most touching moments came when a group of high school students presented their proposal for a mentorship program. They wanted to connect with elementary school students like Anthony, sharing their experiences and providing support. Their presentation included personal stories of how they had overcome similar challenges, and their determination to help create positive change for the next generation was evident. As the day progressed, Judge Thompson began to outline what he called a community justice framework. Rather than simply ruling on the specific incidents involving Anthony, he was working to create a comprehensive approach to addressing systemic issues while ensuring immediate protections for students currently in the system. The framework included several key elements that had emerged from the community discussions. First, there would be immediate changes to the school's disciplinary procedures, requiring multiple viewpoints and evidence before any serious disciplinary action could be taken. Second, a student advocacy program would be established, ensuring that students had support when facing any disciplinary issues. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the framework included a regular review process where students, parents, and educators would come together to assess progress and make necessary adjustments. Anthony's fairness circle concept was incorporated into this aspect, with the judge noting how wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources. Late in the afternoon, something unexpected happened that would become one of the most remembered moments of the entire proceedings. A retired teacher, who had taught at the school for over 3 decades, asked to speak. She brought with her a box of letters she had collected over the years from students who had faced similar challenges to Anthony's. As she read excerpts from these letters, dating back to the 1990s, the parallels to Anthony's experience were unmistakable. But what made her testimony powerful wasn't just the evidence of long-standing issues, it was her call to action. She spoke about how every generation had the opportunity to do better, to learn from past mistakes, and to create positive change. The day concluded with Judge Thompson asking Anthony to join him once again at the front of the courtroom. Together, they reviewed the key points that had emerged from the community discussions. The judge asked Anthony if he felt the proposed changes would make a difference. Anthony's response, delivered with the genuine sincerity of an 8-year-old, brought tears to many eyes. "I think it will help, because now everyone is listening to each other, not just talking." Before adjourning for the day, Judge Thompson made an important announcement. He would take the weekend to review all the evidence, testimonies, and proposed solutions before delivering his final verdict. However, he emphasized that regardless of his ruling, the community engagement and commitment to change he had witnessed over the past few days had already created momentum for positive transformation. The weekend seemed to stretch endlessly for Anthony and his family. They spent time together at home, trying to maintain their normal routine while processing the intense emotions of the past week. Anthony worked on his science homework, drew in his notebook, and helped his father organize books at their family store. His mother noticed how he seemed more relaxed than he had been in months, as if sharing his story had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Throughout the community, discussions about the case continued. Local coffee shops buzzed with conversations about educational reform. Church groups held special prayer sessions for positive change in their schools. Community centers organized youth forums where students could share their experiences and hopes for the future. On Monday morning, the courthouse was packed well before the scheduled start time. People who couldn't fit inside gathered in the plaza outside, where the court had set up speakers so everyone could hear the proceedings. Anthony arrived with his parents, clutching his notebook as always, but today it contained something special, a letter he had written over the weekend, addressed to other kids who might be going through similar experiences. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom precisely at 9 a.m., his demeanor both serious and approachable. He began by thanking everyone who had participated in the proceedings, acknowledging the courage it took to speak truth to power. Then, he did something unexpected. He asked Anthony to join him at the bench one final time. Together, they sat in front of the crowded courtroom, the distinguished judge and the brave 8-year-old boy who had sparked a movement for change. Judge Thompson began by sharing his own childhood experiences of facing unfair treatment, speaking not as a judge but as someone who understood the pain of being judged unfairly. Then, he began to outline his ruling, but he did so in a way that was accessible even to the youngest people in the room. He spoke directly to Anthony and the other children present, explaining each point of his decision and why he had made it. The ruling was comprehensive, addressing both immediate concerns and long-term systemic changes. First, the judge ordered an immediate review of all disciplinary actions taken at the school over the past 5 years, with an independent committee oversight. He mandated the implementation of a new disciplinary system that required multiple witnesses and evidence before any serious action could be taken against a student. Second, he established what would become known as the Anthony Protocol, a set of guidelines ensuring that every student accused of misconduct would have the right to be heard, to present their side of the story, and to have an advocate present during any disciplinary proceedings. This protocol would later be adopted by schools across the country. Third, he ordered the creation of a permanent student advisory council, with representatives from all grade levels, that would have a real voice in school policies and procedures. Anthony's Fairness Circle concept was incorporated as a mandatory weekly activity in every classroom, creating regular opportunities for open dialogue between students and teachers. But perhaps the most significant part of his ruling was the establishment of the Educational Equity Monitor Program. This program would track and analyze disciplinary actions, academic opportunities, and student support services to ensure fair treatment for all students. Regular reports would be made public, and the school would be required to address any disparities identified. As Judge Thompson announced each component of his ruling, he paused to ask Anthony if he understood and if he thought it would help. This interaction transformed what could have been a dry legal proceeding into a meaningful dialogue about justice and fairness that everyone in the room could understand. The judge then addressed the school administrators directly, but his tone was not punitive. Instead, he spoke about the opportunity they now had to become a model for other schools facing similar challenges. He acknowledged the difficulty of change but emphasized the importance of getting it right for the sake of all children. In a particularly moving moment, Judge Thompson read excerpts from Anthony's weekend letter. In it, Anthony had written about his hopes that no other child would have to feel the way he had felt, and his belief that adults and children could work together to make schools better for everyone. The judge praised Anthony's wisdom and compassion, noting that sometimes the youngest voices speak the most profound truths. The ruling also included provisions for teacher training, parent engagement programs, and community involvement in school oversight. The judge emphasized that lasting change would require ongoing commitment from everyone involved: administrators, teachers, parents, students, and the broader community. As he neared the end of his ruling, Judge Thompson did something unprecedented. He asked Anthony to stand beside him and help him bang the gavel, symbolically sealing the decision. As they did so together, the courtroom erupted in applause, not just for the ruling but for the courage of a young boy who had stood up for what was right. Outside the courthouse, the gathered crowd cheered as the details of the ruling were announced over the speakers. Local news crews captured the moment when Anthony and his family emerged, their faces showing both relief and hope. But what caught everyone's attention was Anthony's bright smile as he clutched his notebook, no longer a record of injustice, but now a blueprint for change.